And what a blessing, as I said, it has been to be with the students of Messiah College. I tell you what, these are young people who are making a big difference in the lives of so many people with disabilities, young people who are completely dedicated to making Jesus Christ real to people like me. In fact, I'm sitting here tonight smiling because it was young people, like those students at Messiah, who touched my life at a desperate point of need. You know the story. It was right after the accident in which I became paralyzed back in 1967. I was suffering the trauma of being told I'd never walk, never use my hands, I'd sit down for the rest of my life. And when I was in the hospital back then, in the late 60s, I would lie awake at night trying to understand, what in the world are you doing, God? What are your answers? What are your reasons? But none of it made sense to me back then. Oh, I'd read Romans 8:28, and I could see the Bible was telling me that all this was supposed to be fitting together for my good, but it sure didn't feel very good. And I wasn't in that hospital but 12 months, and I was almost to the point where I felt like I was just going to have to throw in the towel. So despairing, so depressed. I would beg my high school girlfriends to please bring in their mother's sleeping pills or their father's razors, anything at that point to put me out of my misery. The prospect of being a spinal cord injured quadriplegic for the rest of my life. One night, after visiting hours were over, and it was dark, and the nurse's station was empty, I was in my 6-bed ward in the dark, lying awake, as was often the case, fighting back the tears. I could not cry because there was nobody around to blow my nose or wipe my eyes, and it's bad enough when you're paralyzed. You don't want to be paralyzed and messy too, with nobody around to clean you up. I laid my head on the pillow, looking toward the door of the ward. I could see light from the nurse's station shining against the linoleum floor. And as I was staring at that door, suddenly I saw a form, a figure standing there in the doorway, and then that form knelt down and got on its hands and knees. I watched closely as this person on hands and knees drew closer to my bedside. And then I saw this person come up out of the darkness, put her hands on the guardrail of my hospital bed, and oh my goodness, it's my high school friend Jackie. Jackie, I said, what are you doing in here? If they catch you, they're going to kill you. This is way past visiting hours. You shouldn't be here. Shh, she said. And very quietly she stood up and gently took the guardrail of the hospital bed and with a gentle clunk, clunk, lowered it. And then, like my high school girlfriends would do on sleepovers, pajama parties, she climbed up onto that hospital bed and snuggled next to me in the dark, being very quiet so as to not wake my roommates. And in that darkness, as she lay next to me, she took her hand in mine, and she intertwined her fingers in hers and raised our arms together up in the dark so I could see them lifted up high. As she turned her head toward me, and on the pillow, with her lips so close to my ear, she began softly, softly singing. Man of sorrows, what a name for the Son of God who came, ruined sinners to reclaim. Hallelujah, what a Savior. And for 12 months, people have been coming to my bedside with their Bibles, reading to me Romans 8:28, reading to me Romans 8:18, reading to me James chapter 1, verse 3. Welcome this trial as a friend, Joni. God's got a plan, God's got a reason, God's got a purpose. It wasn't until that moment that I experienced the reality of Jesus Christ with me in the midst of my suffering. Because God's got his reasons, and they are good, and they are right, and they are true. But I will be the first to tell you that when your heart is being wrung out like a sponge, an orderly list of the 16 good biblical reasons as to why all this is happening to you, I tell you what, it can sting like salt in a wound. You don't stop the bleeding with reasons and answers, at least in the beginning, when the pain is jagged and bizarre and mind-bending. No, answers always don't reach the problem where it hurts, and that's in the gut and in the heart. When a person is suffering and he asks why? Why God have you allowed this to happen to me? I think it's very much like a child on a bicycle careening down a hill, comes to a corner, slides out on the gravel, the bike tumbles to the asphalt, the child skims and scrapes his knee, grabs his knee, holds it bleeding, sees his daddy running, and cries out, "Daddy, why? Why?" Well, my goodness, how cruel it would be if that daddy ran up to that child, stopped, folded his arms, looked down and said, "Well, son, I'm glad you asked that question." You see, the answer to your question, why, is to be much more careful when you are speeding down a hill. Always watch your trajectory on turns. Be cautious of gravel. Those would have been good answers. I mean, they would have been answers, at least, to that child's problem, right? But that's not what the child was looking for. That little boy doesn't want a list of the 16 good reasons as to why he fell and scraped his knee. No, all he really wants when he asks why is for Daddy to reach down, pick him up, press him against his chest, pat him on the back and say, "There, there, honey. There, there. Daddy's here. Daddy's here. It's okay." And I think when a person is suffering, all we really want to know is that Daddy is here. Our God, Daddy, our plea is for heartfelt assurance that He, our Father, is in the midst of our suffering. We want fatherly assurance that there is an order to our reality that far transcends our problems. We want assurance that our world is not splitting apart at the seams, that it's not spinning out of control in some kind of nightmarish chaos. We want to know that the world, our world, is orderly and stable. And we want God to be at the center of things. What's more, we want Him to be at the center of our suffering. We want Him to be Daddy and consummately good. That's our cry when we're hurting. When we ask why, that's the answer that we want. And so God, just like a good daddy, is not quick to give us answers for our plight. He's not quick to give us reasons why, or to lay out the blueprint as to the plan and purpose behind our pain. No. Like a good father, He does not give answers, advice. No. Instead, He gives Himself. God gives Himself. God resists the proud, but, and I love this but, He gives grace to the humble. And who are the humble? Just people who recognize their desperate need of Jesus. Just people who recognize they can't do life without Jesus. Blessed are the poor in spirit. That is, blessed are you if you come to Jesus every morning in empty-handed spiritual poverty, looking to be filled up, looking to be led through the day. That's the Christian way to live. That's the biblical way to live. Are you hurting? Are you hurting? You can be sure that Jesus feels the sting in His chest when you hurt. Do your friends fail to come through for you? Jesus couldn't get 3 of His best friends to spend an hour in prayer with Him. Do you feel like the world has passed you by? Please know that the world also passed Him by and ignored Him. Does He descend into your hell? Yes, he does. For though the darkness is all around me, you might cry, even the darkness is not dark to him. You can endure anything, even sitting slump-shouldered in a chemotherapy clinic hooked up to toxic drugs if you know that Jesus is sitting next to you. Please, Christians, let's give ourselves as Jesus gives himself, for he came not to be served, but to serve, to show the world that God is with those who suffer.